Very good. Very good.
Yeah, thanks so much. Such a thrill to have you here on the program. And also, I didn't get a chance to formally thank you. You helped me out. You did a bit on the Emmys with me where I locked you in an airtight container for the duration of the show. I think we have a still from that. Yeah, that was... You look legitimately afraid there. But it's one of my favorite things that I ever got to do, and it was because I got to do it with you.
Well,
so.
You sent me the idea, and I thought it was a great idea, and it was fun. Plus, it's television, you know, the Academy, which I'm proud of being part of.
Yeah, it was a really fun night.
I get it on the street a lot. I mean, that's probably usually when I go into a town, people say you sure look like them.
Right,
you know?
right.
And but now I get I voted for you. You know.
I wanted you to live. It's a reality show culture now. Now, so much to talk about. First of all, you know, I was so familiar with the television shows that you did over the years. Loved the shows, and before that, with your comedy albums, I didn't know much about what you were doing before you were stand-up comedian. What kind of jobs did you have?
Well, I was an accountant. I had a degree in accounting, and I worked as an accountant, and just hated it.
You hated being an accountant?
Yeah, I found it very boring. And
it wasn't as thrilling and sexy as you thought it was going to be. Yeah.
and so I left accounting. I said, I've got to find out. I've got to take 2 years out of my life. I was single and no responsibility, and so I said, I got to take 2 years out of my life and find out if I can make it in comedy. Otherwise, I'll spend the rest of my life saying, I wonder what would have happened. You know? And at least I can say, well, I tried it and it didn't work. So, so I left accounting, and I would take part-time jobs and try to break into comedy writer, you know, funny disc jockey, whatever. I never thought I was going to be a stand-up. I mean, that was the furthest thing from my mind. And I once worked, one of the jobs I had, I'd take these temporary jobs. And I once worked for the Illinois State Unemployment Compensation Board. I worked behind the counter at the unemployment office.
Right.
And we got, at that time, this was in the 50s, we got $65 a week.
That was your salary, $65 a week?
And the claimants was $55.
People coming in,
and they only had to come in 1 day a week.
Right,
you know,
right.
It took me a few days to figure, hey, for $10, you know, I can have 4 days off. You know,
right.
So I got fired. And
and then you came back in.
I wound up.
That's
Hi
nice.
guys, see you next week. You know.
Now. You've been married, you mentioned, this is you were in your single days, you've been married 43 years.
43, yeah.
Yeah, incredible. What's the secret, I think, what do you think is the secret of having a relationship that lasts that long?
Well, I have a wife who, she keeps me grounded. She doesn't let me get too full of myself, you know. And I'm sure your wife is the same way.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, she is,
and she talked me into, in the book, about, we took a recreational vehicle trip from hell.
Yeah,
you know, with the kids, because she wanted. So in L.A., we have on Wednesdays, they pick up the trash, and we have to separate it into recyclable and non-recyclable. And so, like on a Tuesday, late in the afternoon, Jenny will say to me, you know, you got to take out the recyclable, you know, because they're picking it up tomorrow morning. And I'll say to her, do you think Paul Newman? You think Joanne Woodward asked Paul Newman to take out the recyclables?
Right.
And she says, well, if you were Paul Newman, I wouldn't ask you to take out.
Keeps you grounded. It's very good. Yeah. I grew up watching you. You were one of my favorite guests on the Tonight Show. You'd go on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
And always a thrill to see you on that show. What was it like being on that program as a guest? Did you? Because I know that you and Johnny were close. So was it?
Yeah, we were friends. And John, when the monologue didn't go well, John kind of. he kind of was going down with the ship, and he was taking everybody on the show with him, you know.
Right.
The guests, whoever. If the monologue didn't go well, so maybe we made a trip with the Rickles, and I'd be pre-interviewed, you know, and say, Bob has a funny story about he just got back from a trip with the Rickles and has a funny story. So, so I'd come out, and it's right there on the sheet for the question, for the first question for Johnny to ask. And Johnny would get that look in his eyes, and he'd say, "Yeah, you ever been to India?"
I can't imagine a meaner thing to do to a comedian. You've got nothing prepared.
I knew I'd never been to India. And didn't have a joke about being in India. But what he would do, and Johnny would do it for all the guests, is he would never let you look bad.
Right.
You know, he would make sure. I was a stand-up comic. He was a stand-up comic. So he kind of trusted that I would somehow handle it. You know, but he would never let you look at.
You had such a comfortable relationship. You played a prank on him once. I've heard about this on the air while Johnny was interviewing a guest. Yeah,
John used to do. It used to be an hour-and-a-half show, and usually the last half hour was an author of some kind, and at the end of the couch there was this clock. You know, and Johnny would look at it, see how much time left in the show.
How much more does he have to do before he can wrap it up? Yeah.
So I did my slug with him, so I moved here, and then we had another guest, and then I moved down, and I'm seated next to Ed, and Ed's right next to the clock. You know? So he brings out this author, and he was a particularly boring author.
Yeah.
So every time John looked away, I told Ed, I said, move it back. So Ed would move it back 5 minutes, and John he would talk to the author, and he'd look over at the clock, and he'd go.
I can only imagine. I can imagine what that would feel like. We have a lot more to talk about. We're going to take a break. More with Bob Newhart when we return. We'll see you in a second.